There will come a time in your life when you will ask yourself a series of questions. Am I happy with who I am?
Am I happy with who I am?
Am I happy with the people around me?
Am I happy with the people around me?
Am I happy with what I'm doing?
Am I happy with what I'm doing?
Am I happy with the way my life is going?
Am I happy with the way my life is going?
Do I have a life?
Do I have a life?
Or am I just living?
Or am I just living?
Do not let these questions restrain or trouble you. Just point yourself in the direction of your dreams. Find your strength in the sound and make your transition.
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 Do I spend too much time thinking and not enough doing? Did I try my hardest at any of my dreams? Did I purposely let others discourage me when I knew I could? Will I die never knowing what I could have been or could have done? Do not let these
You won't be the only one here in Jenniferland. Should you come here, we will hold a conversation, talk about the latest poetry, balloon, create unique colloquialisms, self-brand, pin the Jennifer, personal interviews, or just move to the rhythm.
Symphony for fun.
If you're gonna have a fantasy, at least make it reality. If you're gonna have reality, at least make it a fantasy. You won't be the only one. At Jenniferland, separateness is secondary. Togetherness is the prime condition. At Jenniferland, you'll be where and who you want to be from the moment you arrive. You'll enjoy guided exercises like walk therapy, infinity exploration, braiding. At Jennifer Gym, we offer curves, figure eights with your hips, dancing, icing on cake. Cake! If you're gonna have a fantasy, at least make it reality. If you're gonna have reality, at least make it a fantasy. Please, stop by in person. there's plenty of fun things to do. Like spoken self-portraits, gesture without plot, festive garb, romance, fragrance so alive, invigorating social validation, gals just hanging, free samples, everybody welcome. Weekends were made for Jennifers. So what are you waiting for? Make a clean break with the past. Play here, stay here.
Jenniferland. Jenniferland, where hair is important. Jenniferland, find your Jennifer. Jenniferland. 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 Jenniferland.
Have a fantasy.
Why be yourself when you could be someone else?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me for my graduate artist talk. My name is Becca Kauffman, and I was born and raised in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but I always wanted to live in New York City. So as soon as I could, I moved there. And I lived in Brooklyn and Queens from 2008 until just a few months ago, spring 2022, when I relocated to Portland. I've always done things in public. I have a background in performance, music, and dance. And so from a young age, if I wasn't on stage as a singing dog or a mystery-solving detective, I was delivering show-stopping numbers for an audience of 2 in my living room, under the pretense that my living room was Times Square. So it might not come as a surprise that I'm still doing things in public, and I'm still using some of the same moves. Just the other week, I performed a dance every day at an art gallery on PSU campus. I was attempting to marry some key components of my work that have surfaced over the last few years, involving participatory performance in pedestrian spaces and the use of the human body to communicate stories and messages. Behind this gallery window looking out onto the street, I thought of myself as a decorated pedestrian, decorating the pedestrian. Sharing myself with the public is my way of getting people to share themselves with me. I'm especially interested in public spaces because of how they hold so much potential for random and spontaneous social encounters. I like to spend time in these places and approach them with the eye of a citizen journalist, a spy, an interlocutor, and a mischievous participant. Art for me is a flamboyant public utility, as vital as electricity. I want the art that I make to serve a function, and I want to make the functional fun. A lot of my work is about dialing into my personal fantasies by trying on different roles and jobs, which I think is a way to experiment with fitting into the world. One role that I devoted myself to for 7 years was Jennifer Vanilla. I started performing through this alter ego in 2015. I conceived of Jennifer as a live-action role play and considered her my entrepreneurial fantasy vessel, a larger-than-life, highly social, charmingly naive alien creature who had descended onto Earth from an enchanted place called Jenniferland. Jennifer's motto was, if you're going to have a fantasy, at least make it reality. If you're going to have reality, at least make it a fantasy. Through Jennifer Vanilla, I released musical albums, broadcast a public access television program, hosted JV Lab, a monthly neighborhood variety show, made a line of conversation-inducing t-shirts, produced self-promotional commercials, crowd-surfed at MoMA PS1, and cultivated myself as Jennifer into a public figure with the intention of corralling publics into a momentary bonded mass. My musical and stage productions were highly collaborative community endeavors that enlisted dozens of friends and artists from New York City.
With Jennifer, there was no fourth wall. Because Jennifer was fictitious, it made sense to expose the fiction of theatrics by blurring the onstage, offstage binary. So the stage was wherever the action was. In performances, I made my entrance from behind the crowd, usually through the front door of the venue, and jogged through the audience, shaking hands with people and introducing myself. In Jennifer's world, Jennifer Vanilla was famous. I had a theory that this engineered celebrity could create something for people to have in common. I wanted Jennifer to be what I called a universal neighbor, someone familiar who you'd recognize, like a spokesperson or a broadcaster. I wanted to be a village person. I was intrigued by fan culture for bands like the Grateful Dead, where an entire way of life and corresponding visual language developed in response. In a nod to Deadhead tradition, I directly borrowed some of their iconic imagery and appropriated the orange Grateful Dead bear as my mascot, Jennifer Bear, played by my friend Elsa Brown. At my last JV Lab variety show, I had the audience give me a collective haircut, lock by lock, to the tune of Black Sabbath's Changes. Jennifer was changing. She wanted to enter the real world. It was here that I announced my self-sanctioned artist residency in Times Square. I approached my time here as a village person in training, and for 10 days, tried to become a regular by familiarizing myself with the ins and outs of the area. I wandered into unlocked buildings, eavesdropped on tourists, and opened the door to Waitress the musical. I sang with a street entertainer, received Reiki on a public bench, and performed a greeting ritual with a network of public surveillance cameras. What interested me most about Times Square was the way the circus and the quotidian coexist. Times Square is a collision of fiction and nonfiction, where fantasy and reality swirl together. It's a show that everybody becomes a part of just by being there. You're the performer and the audience all at once. And surrounding all the fanfare are actual neighborhoods where people live and attend church and go grocery shopping to complain about the price of lemons. I've always been drawn to artificial places, representations of the idea of a city. I think that's because entering artifice highlights the theatrics of everyday life and exposes what's unnatural about how we're socialized to behave. It gives a place a layer of self-awareness, and inside of that, we're prompted to become more aware of ourselves and the slippery nature of authenticity. I entered the social practice program with the intention of pushing my art practice beyond Jennifer, to make work as myself under my own name and redirect my skill set and the methods I've been using as Jennifer to projects that centered other people and groups. The question became, how could I do what Jennifer was doing without Jennifer? For my first attempt, I went back to a familiar place, Times Square, with new tools, and I revisited the subject of Times Square in a project called Popular Opinions. Times Square is one of the most visited tourist destinations in the world, but what did people actually think of it? How is it a monumental disappointment or a treasured symbolic mecca or a stain on the city to be avoided? I collected opinions from 50 people and compiled them into a script, which I recited on site and recorded in a video to share back to participants. I was interested in using my voice as a service to broadcast the voices of others. And this experiment gave me the chance to be a spokesperson for people's thoughts. These critical takes were really delightful because they poked holes in the mainstream narrative we have of iconic Times Square and offered a totally different perspective than you typically get from tourist propaganda. It made me wonder what a Times Square souvenir t-shirt would say if it were written from the point of view of a New Yorker. So I made a suite of t-shirts representing two representing the local experience and two the tourist experience. I called them social souvenirs. A social souvenir didn't cost money. It was earned through a social exchange, specifically a 15-minute conversation about anything. I launched the project at a pop-up radio station where I spoke with a man named Clarence. He told me about moving to a nearby hotel turned homeless shelter during the pandemic and became the only person I've ever met who actually lives in Times Square. Without knowing anything about my project yet, he asked me if I happened to have an extra t-shirt. I did. Then I met a friendly security guard named James at the biggest souvenir shop in the city. He told me about his policy of enforcing the rules with compassion, and he spouted some poetic wisdom about his existential outlook. He asked me, "Do you enjoy your life?" Our conversation was published in our MFA program's Social Forms of Art Journal, or SOFA. Putting it in a magazine formalized our exchange because it made it public. And that helped me see how an art project could lead to an interview, and how an interview could lead to an art project. Talking with people had been the driving force of my art practice before I realized I had an art practice. In the application for this program, we're asked to submit a video of our special talent, and mine was talking to strangers. But I never was really sure what to do with those conversations once I'd had them. And then I learned that conversations are a valued method and medium in the world of social practice. So for my next project, I decided to talk to my neighbor, Luis Orlando Beltran, and make a book from our conversations. Luis runs a bustling thrift shop in Queens, New York, my old neighborhood. He's a people person, and he's got a lot of stories. I thought making this book would be the perfect excuse to spend time with him. Over the course of our morning meetings, Luis and I shared coffee and oranges at an improvised sidewalk cafe outside of his store. And he relayed tales of his immigration to the US from El Salvador, learning English from his aunt and uncle's Engelbert Humperdinck records, getting sober, finding God, and about how he channels those experiences into running a community business. The stories that he told me became Going the Extra Mile, a 10-chapter pocket-sized book available for free at Luis's store for any customer who finds themselves as enchanted with him as I was. Luis was really excited to show his grandkids the book, and the last time I saw him, he said he already has ideas for a sequel. One of the things I admire most about Luis is the way he really hosts his block and brings the neighborhood to life. His shop spills out onto the street corner in eye-catching displays. He says hello to everyone who passes by, and he's constantly connecting people to one another. I once gave a ride to a perfect stranger from New York all the way to Boston just because he asked me to. The pandemic had me questioning my usefulness as an entertainer, and talking to Luis made me wonder how I, like him, might make my own environment more hospitable. How could I formalize my soft skills into a legitimately useful position? I went looking for answers in the role of the host. I started pitching myself as an MC for music shows around New York. And MCs are pretty atypical for a music show, which gave me significant freedom to make up my role as I went along. I took cues from Emily Post's Blue Book of Etiquette and overlaid her rules for domestic party hosting onto clubs and concert venues. I made it my job to create a hospitable environment, both for the people attending the show and for the people working it. I interviewed seasoned hosts like Fernando Perez, a former minor league baseball player turned field reporter who compared the host to the mortar between bricks. I started a newsletter on the art of hospitality, a word which I learned meant the virtue of a great soul that cares for the whole universe through the ties of humanity. That seemed pretty lofty, so I opted to muse on the role of the bathroom attendant. I carried my notes with me and made sure to clearly identify myself. I wanted to be the social glue that held all the disparate parts of a production together, and I invited consumer feedback. My experimentation in hosting brought me back to one of my favorite art projects, Sophie Call's 1994 piece, Phone Booth, where she appointed herself the caretaker of a public telephone booth in the East Village of Manhattan. This was in response to an assignment she received from the writer Paul Auster called Cultivating a Spot. For this assignment, Auster instructed, pick one spot in the city and begin to think of it as yours. It doesn't matter where, and it doesn't matter what. A street corner, a subway entrance, a tree in the park. Take on this place as your responsibility. Keep it clean, beautify it. Think of it as an extension of who you are, as a part of your identity. Take as much pride in it as you would in your own home. I love the idea of creating a temporary microculture on a city street, claiming maintenance as art, like the feminist artist mural Lederman Euclides, and manufacturing an ideal situation through an act of fantastic placemaking. I wanted to cultivate my own spot, and I had just the spot in mind. Just a few blocks from my apartment and Louisa's thrift shop, there was a street that was nearly impossible to cross. It separated a dense residential neighborhood from the one public park nearby, and it took forever to get to that park because cars never stopped for pedestrians. I'm gonna try to skip.
Oh, it is very bad around here.
I'm gonna skip it for time. You'll see another one. I'd recently interviewed Gary Giordano, the district manager of my local community board, with a healthy head of hair. And I learned that despite a fatal accident that had happened here, his most recent request to install crosswalks had been denied by the Department of Transportation. Turns out that the process for adding new infrastructure to a neighborhood requires meeting very specific criteria like car volume and foot traffic. And if your intersection doesn't meet those guidelines on paper, you don't get what you need, even if everyone who actually uses that intersection is suffering. It was hard not to notice this glaring gap between bureaucratic procedure and the lived realities of the people who had to cross this street every day. I saw an opportunity to put my skills as a broadcaster into action, to make myself useful. I started talking about this intersection to anyone who would listen. And eventually, word got out around the neighborhood that I was interested in doing a performance intervention there, directing traffic. I received this text from my long-lost friend, Nicole Galpern, who I didn't even know lived a few blocks away from me. She'd been plagued by the state of the intersection too, and she wanted to join forces. Powered by our shared enthusiasm, we formed the Crosswalk Fantasy Committee and began what would ultimately become my graduate project. We both knew that bureaucracy is interminably boring, and it was no wonder why citizens didn't get involved more often. Nicole and I wanted to add some flair to bureaucratic banality. So we decided to stage a hybrid rally, happening, citizen action to bring the neighborhood together around the issue and amplify the voices that were going unheard. At the rally, we enacted our fantasy of what we wanted this intersection to be. A safe place where pedestrians were respected and prioritized, where people didn't need to risk their lives to get to the other side. We created a crosswalk fantasy. I played the part of citizen crossing guide and directed traffic with oversized Mickey Mouse gloves and help from volunteers holding hand-painted stop signs. Nicole, inspired by the oral historian Studs Terkel, collected audio testimonials from locals about the challenges they faced crossing the street. Now you get your sample. Here's what Ruth Lowe had to say.
I fear for the people's lives. I've been living here for 65 years, and I must say this is the worst corner. This block has been complaining for over 20 years. With the park here, you know, you got kids coming out all the time, running across the street, cars here, do not slow down. They do not stop. If they see you walking with a cane or wobbling and having trouble walking, they step on the freaking gas and they aim for you. And they're always speeding through here. They do have to do something about this corner. Something needs to be done because it's only going to get worse. It's not getting better.
She really amped up the drama for that, and I appreciate it. It's necessary.
I feel for the people's life.
Okay. We launched a postcard campaign to inundate the DOT's office with demands that they reevaluate their decision. Some candidates for local political office advocated on our behalf through a borrowed megaphone, and we collected over 600 petition signatures. We compiled all of this info into an online community dossier, and we shared it with the Department of Transportation. And then we waited. The months passed by slowly, and in between our routine check-ins with the DOT's office, Nicole and I grew increasingly impatient and worried. Would we ever see those stripes? We went back and forth about just painting the crosswalk ourselves. I talked to a group called Crosswalk Collective LA for Sofa Journal, who were making national headlines at the time for their tactical urbanism in Los Angeles. And I got advice from their handbook on how to paint our own. Ultimately, though, Nicole and I decided that part of this project was about testing the bureaucratic process to see just how far we could get by following the sanctioned protocol. So when we got the chance to present our findings, or what Crosswalk Collective LA eloquently described as the hidden data of feeling unsafe, to a group of traffic engineers at the DOT, we took it. And in August 2022, we got the email we had been waiting for. Our beloved intersection had been approved for stop signs with crosswalks on the way. Nicole and I were elated, and we kept everyone in the neighborhood up to speed by posting coming soon flyers at the crosswalk. I reprised the role of citizen crossing guide in my downtime. 4 months later, I received this photograph from my neighbor, Lily. She was the first person that laid eyes on the fresh white stripes that had been painted on the ground. And these stripes made the local news. In the spirit of decorating bureaucracy and not surrendering to its banality, Nicole and I decided to have a party to celebrate and to thank everyone in the neighborhood for participating in our campaign. We invited them all to Crosswalk Victory. At our event, we put our own spin on official city ceremonies. We opened with a ritual stop sign ding and delivered a speech over an Olympic opening ceremony soundtrack. We sold crosswalk-themed t-shirts, held a ribbon-cutting ceremony with a giant pair of scissors. A local musician performed a drum solo on the stop sign. We inaugurated our new crosswalks with a pedestrian parade. And we presented a victory proclamation declaring our crosswalk fantasy realized. Everyone in attendance signed the proclamation, and Nicole and I bolted it to the new stop sign so that the story of this hard-won paint and metal would be memorialized. All attendees of the victory party were given a sticker to encourage them to live out their own crosswalk fantasy. Because if you're going to have a fantasy, at least make it reality. Our program founder, Harold Fletcher, once described art as a strategy to get something done. That's exactly how I think about this project. Nicole and I put our artistic skills to use toward a concrete outcome. I think of it as utilitarian art. Artful because it used symbolism and recognizable aesthetic motifs to get its point across, and functional because it went beyond the symbolic and into real civic territory. Nicole and I cultivated a spot and made it more hospitable. When I came to Portland, fresh off directing traffic at the Crosswalk rally in Queens, I was looking to continue making work on or about the street. I found out through my professor, Lisa, about a team of 5th grade crossing guards at a local elementary school. They were called Safety Patrol. I found a collaborator in my classmate, Mo Geiger, who works in theatrical design. We shared a desire to orchestrate a parade with the safety patrol. We weren't quite sure where to begin until we took a look at the uniforms they were using. They were sharing these 2 worn-out safety vests among the 15 of them, and I would watch the kids get tangled up in them at crosswalk duty in the morning. And Mo and I saw a glaring need for improvement. We figured that elevating the look of safety patrol for these kids who were providing a service to other students would encourage them to value their own role in a larger civic context. We held a workshop about the visual language of the street. Arrows, yield signs, pedestrian icons, all the familiar shapes and colors that we see out in the world every day that tell us where to go and how to move. Then we asked each kid to design a safety vest based on their own interpretation and collaging together of these symbols. This is what they came up with. We debuted this new line of wearable student artworks at the first annual High Visibility Crosswalk Spectacular, a parade on the school grounds celebrating visibility, freedom of movement, and kid power. It culminated in a dance party at the school crosswalk. And later that summer, 2 of the student vests were displayed downtown at the Portland Municipal Building for a King's School Museum of Art exhibit curated by a 4th grader. An inspiration for the spectacular was the artist Jeremy Deller's Procession, a parade that he produced in Manchester, England, that celebrated the city's unsung heroes and unlikely pageant candidates, like a group of unrepentant smokers and every local mascot. The inclusion of mascots was especially exciting to me because I have a bit of an obsession with them, and I even interviewed the PSU mascot Victory Viking for Sofa Journal. Eventually, I got to talk with Jeremy Deller himself about his large-scale public art projects for my very last Sofa Journal interview. This is me freaking out on Zoom the minute that I heard his ding requesting entry to the Zoom room. And this is Jeremy Deller. He told me obsession in itself is interesting. The next school year, this past fall, Mo and I received funding from the Precipice Fund and the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Arts to continue our work with Safety Patrol. So we decided this year's students would collectively write possibly the world's first ever Safety Patrol theme song. We commissioned Los Angeles musician Jerry Paper to compose the music, and the kids and I co-wrote the lyrics and melody together. We practiced a lot and recorded the song in a school classroom with professional recording engineers from a local youth music program.
Let's all cross the crosswalk. Let's all cross the crosswalk. Let's all cross the crosswalk. Let's all cross the street.
The song debuted yesterday at the second annual Crosswalk Spectacular in a choreographed performance on top of our exclamation crosswalk made by Mo Geiger. We paraded around the school grounds once again and made a spectacle in the field with traffic-themed flags and banners made by my classmates, Olivia Delgandio and Karen Osnes, and kites that mimicked street signs by Mo. Every student received a copy of the Safety Patrol theme song on CD, and one was submitted to the school library so that future safety patrollers can listen and learn the song every year. Our spectacle in the field was inspired in part by Rosemary Mayer's temporary monuments, which were weather balloons that she painted on with the names of writers, artists, flowers, friends, or constellations. They created these atmospheric sculptures in the sky. I'm really compelled by the idea of offering ephemeral messages to the outside world. So through my work with Safety Patrol and Crosswalk Fantasy Committee, the hidden beauty of the built environment really started to come alive for me. Fantasy and reality started to merge. The traffic cone became a participatory instrument. The crosswalk, a precious gemstone. The stop sign, a showcase of the octagon. We tend not to think about them much, but these infrastructural anchors help organize a city, and they also organize us within it. They choreograph the ballet of our everyday, and they're brought to life through our participation. I couldn't help but notice traffic cones everywhere I went, and I would see their shape and color in other things. The crosswalk became a ladder and a bridge, a magical symbol that changes the way that people move through space. For my MFA exhibition at Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, I translated my new obsession into a glorification of the street. I called it Crosswalk Fantasy Lab, to reflect the trial and error, experimentation, and experiential nature of my learning process. The octagon is an elemental part of our visual experience on the street. In sacred geometry, the octagon represents the unification of heaven and earth and is a symbol of rebirth. That makes sense to me because this show is about elevating the way we think about the ground we walk on and literally bringing it up to eye level so we can see it and see it in a new way. Framed inside this octagon is a close-up of crosswalk. This crosswalk was also on display in the form of these crosswalk rocks, which were shards of crosswalk paint that I found on the street in Portland. These were elevated to the status of precious pedestrianite and put on an actual pedestal. I made octagon viewfinders for museum goers to take with them so that they could hone new ways of looking and noticing the built environment when they stepped outside. I remixed some symbols with this sculpture, this is a bird's eye view, and cross-pollinated the traffic cone with the octagonal shape of the stop sign using crosswalk paint for its reflective stripes. The 6-foot-tall shadow of a Portland street sign hinted at its human-like presence, and a video of Safety Patrol and street footage played to a triumphant soundtrack. So, because of my background in performance, I can't help but see the street as a stage and pedestrian movement as a dance. And that's where reality and the fantastical intersect for me in my work. More and more, I see the intersection as a site full of poetic potential. Its design gives way to intersecting lives, intersecting perspectives, intersecting dynamics of power, modes of movement, danger, and safety. It also has a lot of potential for engagement because intersections are a place where people are, people in motion. I think the street and public space in general can be a place for both expressive and functional movement. Once I realized this, I started to wonder, what happens when we rupture pedestrian forms of movement in pedestrian spaces and get a little bit more creative? What ways can we decorate the pedestrian? I started to do some experiments. In elevator sequence, which took place right in this building, and if you took the elevator up or down today, you might recognize it. I invited people to break the unspoken rule that we remain expressionless and asocial inside of an elevator. People walked into the elevator playing club music and were instructed to improvise a dance each time the doors opened. These improvisations were compiled into a collectively choreographed dance video. And people seemed to really enjoy the permission that this project gave them, puncturing that seal of normal social behavior. I find myself looking for permission a lot as I move through the world. And that makes me want to create opportunities for out of the ordinary behavior, to carve out a time and space where things you wouldn't normally do are temporarily acceptable. Maybe that would ultimately make them more acceptable down the line. So I started the Department of Public Dance. The Department of Public Dance claims dance as a utility and sanctions public acts of dance through the institutional guise of a made-up city agency. This city agency builds social infrastructure. In this project, I host weekly dance happenings in public places and invite people to join the Public Acts of Dance Company, an accessible and ever-growing dance troupe. To become a member, all you have to do is dance in public. Hosting these dances is an act of giving permission. I dance first so that you can too. I was inspired in part by the artist San Keller's San Dance Company, a dance company in which anyone can join by contractually agreeing to dance to a specific song of their choosing every time they hear it for the rest of their lives. Around the time I formed the company, I'd also started cultivating a new spot at my local half-empty shopping mall, Lloyd Center, and was brainstorming ways to join the ranks of artists taking advantage of its dwindling, precarious state. My mind turned to Gillian Waring's 1994 piece, Dancing in Peckham, a performance in video in which she filmed herself dancing freely in the middle of a busy shopping mall, as if in the privacy of her own home. I decided to borrow a little bit of each of these artists' ideas and put them together. An open invitation dance company at the mall. The Lloyd Mall is in a much different state and era than the mall of the 90s that Waring danced in. It's half dead, just like capitalism. But despite the dozens of shuttered stores, like this former Hollister, and this empty Marshall's, and this food court that only serves chicken, and this fountain called capitalism, which has run dry, people still come here. And the act of dancing in public is disruptive and absurd just the same. Dancing here proposes a way of spending time together that doesn't rely on transactional consumerism to legitimize being in a place. It offers a new pathway for forming relationships. The first public dance was published as a flip book and is for sale at various retail shops throughout the mall. Lloyd Center is in a state of deep transition. The question of what it is and what it could become is constantly being asked and explored. It's at a crossroads, or you could say an intersection, which is why it makes perfect sense to me to be in dialogue with it through dance. Dancing for me is about embodying a state of continuous transition, transformation, and rebirth. Dancing to me is trans. It creates a kind of generative shattering and rearticulating of gender, of propriety, of how a body is supposed to move, of how we relate to one another. Plus, not only is Lloyd Mall a pedestrian site, it's exclusively pedestrian. And I'm gonna say ice skaters count. Malls were actually designed to be replicas of the ideal town square, where pedestrians rule. Being at Lloyd Center kind of feels like I stepped through the looking glass of Times Square and came out the other side. On this side, the original idealism that built it is metamorphosing into something wild and unknown, a place that lots of people in Portland are collectively striving to make fantastic. I sense I have a job to do. and a new village to explore. Maybe I'll become a village person after all. Thank you so much. Thank you. I want to say thank you to all of you for coming and listening, and to my family and my classmates and my teachers and my brilliant collaborators, and to my cohort for your support and your thoughtful feedback over the past 3 years. It's been really inspiring to learn alongside you. And now, I would like to invite you to join me in my public acts of dance company. Please rise.
We love you. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to take another short break.
Do you want to do questions? We have time? I don't know. No time? Oh, right. It's because it's 15. Perfect.
You
Perfect.
did so good.
Thank you.
The time, I can't believe it is like literally 1 minute. Actually, is there like a 30-second question?
It's okay.
Ariana, come on.
We know you have one. Yeah.
And I wonder always about you reevaluating that concept.
Ooh, that's a big question, Ariana. It's not a 30-second question. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole point, like the transition from Jennifer and beyond, is decentering myself. So I don't want to be the only neighbor. I don't want to be singular in that way. You know, I want collectivity. I want like a group of neighbor. I want neighborship. So like, I guess it's about transitioning away from a focus on identity to relationships.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
You did it. You answered that. 30 seconds. It's so good.
This is less of a question and more of a comment, but I think that what makes all this really work is the enthusiasm because that is contagious.
Thanks, Dad.
That's way off, y'all. We have 15 more minutes.
Woo, yeah.
More fight?
More trampolining.
More trampoline. There's no reason.
Ask me a question. Yes, Garland.
Do you have any suggestions or prompts for talking to strangers? How do you approach strangers?
I feel like you would have no problem with this. You're so approachable. Oh. Yes. Okay. Someone just asked, do I have any tips for how to approach and talk to strangers? It's hard because I find mostly strangers wind up talking to me. So if that happens, and some of you also have this experience, so maybe there's something about remaining open. When I did like these, I've done a few like self-sanctioned artist residencies in open air, and I just try to remain available, like keep my eyes open, assess and survey my surroundings, like try to make eye contact with people. It's kind of like getting called on in the classroom. Like if you make eye contact with the teacher, they'll instantly call on you. So if you make eye contact with people on the street and someone feels chatty and wants to talk, they'll identify you as a target. I guess it also has to do with how much of your time you're willing to give on any given day, because sometimes people will just go and go and go, and you have to go away. But maybe it's about smiling too. I don't know. I think I smile a lot without thinking about it, and that often gets interpreted as an invitation. But I also just love hearing people's stories. So once you start listening, people really get going. No. Yeah. Okay. Mo asked, how am I thinking about audience differently now that I've been working in socially engaged forums? Well, I think even in like the earlier stages of Jennifer Vanilla, there was this kernel of really wanting to involve the audience and have them be with me, because I felt like a deep isolation as a performer by being on the stage completely, cordoned off from the people on the other side watching, and having this yearning to merge the two. And I think that they're getting closer and closer together the more that I try. With Department of Public Dance, for example, like I think of it as a fully participatory experience. It's not, I mean, it's there to be witnessed, but I don't consider it to be a performance. I don't consider myself to be performing, to be on while I'm doing that. And I don't ask anyone else who participates to be presenting themselves to other people. It's more about just being in it. And I think I'm really drawn to forms of what they call the performing arts, like music and dance, just because it involves the body as like the vessel to get it done. But I'm more interested in the experiential part of those things and trying to get people engaged with it. So looking forward, I'm trying to hatch ways to create like scenarios that people could walk into, and that would kind of inspire a certain kind of engagement or an unexpected encounter, and kind of like create, like orchestrate a situation where you would wind up talking to strangers. Like, how could I manufacture that in a natural way, but get more people involved? Oh, what have I gained personally from shifting my practice away from performance? Yeah. I think more experiences of togetherness is what I have going for me now. Jennifer, I was really trying to do that, but because of that engineered celebrity that I mentioned, rumors are true. Being famous is very isolating. Even if you're fake famous, But the whole point was that I just wanted to make friends, and I felt like I kind of needed a device to do that. And a lot of like the socially engaged parts of my work have been excuses to hang out with people, just like having the project be this device or a vehicle so that, I could just spend time with somebody. And I feel like maybe I don't have to hide behind that so much anymore. I just kind of want to work with people collaboratively. Oh, Jilly?
So I think, like, I guess I'm curious. The question is,
Which part will I repeat?
how are you thinking about the
Okay, the question for Zoom is, how have I approached permission in educational institutions? You're making me realize that my parents are here, my family's here, and we've have a pretty untraditional family situation, and I've always kind of lived like just left of the main, like outside of the mainstream in this way, and in a way kind of like exoticized or even like fetishized normalcy, but it feels very foreign to me and I don't understand how to participate in it. So I don't, but I also am like desperate to try to fit in. So I think I always hold those things at once. And but I guess I've had the fortune of being exposed to a lot of alternative forms of education in my life and places that gave me permission from an early age. And so that I think comes a little bit natural to me to try. And I hate doing things that other people have already done. And so I have to think of something new, which is why like I taught this class at PSU last term, and it was called Participatory Exploration of the Vocal Arts, and it like made no sense. I mean, it did, but I made it up completely from scratch, and I just felt like I had to do that. But I don't know. I guess I just take it as far as I can and see if it gets green lit or not. Does that answer the question a little bit? Okay. Nadine. Thanks. Ooh. Well, Jennifer Vanilla buried. Yeah. Oh my God, I kind of imagined her getting embalmed and carried across the country like Abraham Lincoln. Everyone's carrying the casket, singing all the songs. Yeah, and then she would get buried in like the deepest, like it would be like a chute that people had dug to the core of the earth. You just drop it down, that's instantly incinerated when it reaches a certain layer. She's gone. The spirit returns to the dewdrop from which she emerged. And when does someone stop becoming a stranger? Like on the second meeting? Maybe at the end of the bus ride?
At which point we talked about this you mentioned a connection to transness and was it dancing or awareness?
Dance.
Dance embodying a state of continuous transition, dancing with
Is there anything more you want to say about that museum? Practice your person, but I'm just curious. It was a very provocative in a lot of provocative projects. So I just love to.
Wow, I never thought of myself as provocative. Really, no. I hate breaking rules. It makes me so nervous. That's why I have to do it inside the framework of an art project, because that's what gives the permission, I think. Yeah, I think I'm just a person who's constantly in motion and in shifting. And that's been happening for me a lot in the last 3 years, like geographically and artistically and personally. And throughout all of it, I've always been dancing. And the constant movement, it's like this, it's like refusing to like land or like commit to something fixed. And I don't think any of us really are fixed. And dancing helps remind us of that. Yeah, and then there's like a fluidity involved too, to movement and to like my own identity. And I think to a lot of the people that come to Department of Public Dance and to the environment of the mall, it's transient. People come and go. They're going to go shopping or to skate through the ice skating rink, or someone I met just walks through it as a shortcut to get to his house from the bus stop instead of walking around the building. But it's all about transit, transportation, transition, transformation, all of it, just that constant tumbling that is life. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.